I realize it's very presumptuous to get up and talk about death as if I know. But I have a lot of chutzpah. That's Sanskrit for... And something has happened to me as a result of my meanderings through the realms of consciousness over the past 30 years that has changed my attitudes towards death. And a lot of the fear that death generated that led to denial has gone from me. And I'm one of the strange people that absolutely delights and enjoys being with people as they're dying. In fact, it is as such incredible grace for me that in the morning when I know I'm going to be with such a person, I get absolutely thrilled in my body, in my being. Because I know I'm going to have an opportunity to be in the presence of truth. We are living at a time where birth has come out of the closet in the past 20, 30, 40 years. And death is just beginning to come out of the closet. It is now beginning to be acceptable to consider the possibility that people actually die. Usually in our culture, it has been put behind doors, behind sheets, you don't talk to the children about it, you don't show anybody. And for me, who has grown up in that culture, it was quite an experience when I started to live in India, where when somebody dies, they are put on a pallet and wrapped in a silk sheet or a sheet, and then carried through the streets to the burning grounds, and with Satya Hai, Satya Ha, with a mantra being recited as they go through the streets. And the death is public for everybody to see. The body is right there. It's not in a box. It's not hidden. And because India is a place of the extended family and very few and inadequate hospitals, most people are dying at home, so that most people, as they grow up, have been in the presence of someone dying. While in our culture, an amazing number of people, even at middle age, have never been in the presence of someone dying. They have walked away from it and hidden from it. And I was one of them, and I have certainly changed in the past 25 years. I think the reason that I changed was that, and I know this will offend some of you, but truth is always difficult, that through my experiences with psychedelic chemicals, you might say, particularly originally the mushrooms of Mexico, which were used by curanderos and oracles in Mexican religions, and the mushrooms have been used throughout religious history, actually, for mystical experiences. Through that first experience, I came in contact with a part of my being that as an adult I had not identified with, I had not acknowledged. And it was a part of my being that lay behind my social roles, behind my personality. And it was indeed a part of my being that didn't seem to have much to do with birth and death. It could be called soul or awareness or spirit or God or whatever. And for me, who was a Western social psychologist, professor at Harvard, materialist, philosophical materialist, that experience was an extremely confusing one, because there was nothing in my armamentarium of scientific methodology or in psychology that prepared me to deal with that component of my being. Once I experienced that being, it started to profoundly change the nature of my life after that, of who I thought I was. Because up until then, I had identified with that which dies. And as long as you identify with that which dies, there is always fear of death, because it's the fear of cessation of existence. And I realize now that although I didn't know the form that it would take after death, I knew that what there was about something about the essence of my awareness was outside of death. Now, the interesting thing for me at that time was that when I had that experience, it was what I called ineffable, indescribable, because I had no concepts to deal with what I was finding in my being. And probably had I been more emotionally connected to my Jewish roots, I would have found in the Kabbalah and in all of the Book of Brilliance and so on, I would have found metaphors and analogies for what I experienced. But I wasn't. And the book that came to my attention, that was brought to my attention by Aldous Huxley, who was part of our project and visiting at MIT that year, was a book called The Tibetan Book of the Dead. And what happened to me when I read the Tibetan Book of the Dead was I was reading descriptions of the direct experiences I was having with the mushrooms. Now, this was very confusing to me, again, because this book was 2,500 years old. I thought I was at the leading edge of the unknown. And here was a very ancient text, a book that was used by monks, by lamas, read to fellow lamas at the point they were dying and for the days following their death, whispered in their ear, about the process of dying. Out of that, my colleague Timothy Leary and my other colleague Ralph Metzner and I began to see the Tibetan Book of the Dead in metaphorical terms as a story of psychological death and rebirth, even though it was used as physical death and rebirth. And so we did a book called The Psychedelic Experience, which was a manual based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead for going through this psychological death rebirth. And I really think that although it has been made trivial in a way, the idea of dying and being born into truth or wisdom or spirit is really what our business is that we're talking about when we deal with death. And that as you have extricated yourself from a solid identification with body and with personality and with materiality, you begin to have spaciousness to allow for the possibility that death may be part of process rather than end. And I think I feel that very deeply. People say, do you believe that there is continuity after death? And I say, I don't believe it, it is, which offends my scientific friends no end. But belief is something you hold with your intellect, and this has gone way beyond that now. So you may be just sharing my total pathology. I have no idea, and that it's up to your intuition to decide that. I would never know if I was completely crazy. So to show you how crazy I am, I have a friend who some of you have met through books, a friend named Emmanuel. Emmanuel is a spook, a being that has dropped his body somewhere along the way and speaks through a lovely woman named Pat Rodegast. And I must point out to you when I'm talking about channeled beings that all beings that don't have bodies aren't wise. That there are as many schlock people without bodies as there are with them, and there are a lot of well-meaning beings who've left their bodies and want to send back messages like, buy United States Steel, and they don't know any more than they knew before. So you have to be very discriminating when dealing with disembodied beings in the same way as you are with embodied beings. But Emmanuel has a lot of nachas. He has a lot of real wisdom, and he's like an uncle to me. He's just wonderful fun. And when I said to Emmanuel, I deal a lot with the fear of dying in this culture and death. What should I tell people? And he said, Ram Dass, tell them that death is absolutely safe. Now just put those two things together and realize what a far out line that is. Death is absolutely safe. And then he added one more image. He said, it's like taking off a tight shoe. Okay, can you hear that one? Like taking off a tight shoe. Now just imagine that you as spirit or awareness have contained yourself in an incarnation, or contained it in a conceptual model of who you are and on a storyline. And then at some point, you dissolve out of that, you break out of that, and there is this incredible release quality. Well, these kinds of things I'm talking about are very different from the way in which our culture is presently treating death. Presently, we see death as an enemy. The medical profession sees death as a failure. The temple of life is the intensive care unit. The medical person is the priest. And when that became unacceptable, we then moved towards the hospice movement. Now, the hospice movement is extremely useful in coming back to a psychologically supportive environment, because intensive care units don't allow babies, they don't allow dogs, they don't allow flowers, they don't allow the human connections that give you psychological support. And the hospice movement was very interested in providing psychological support. And as such, it has played a useful role. And it provides a warm setting either in the home or in a hospice residential space for people to have psychological support and respect and dignity as a human, as a personality, while they are dying. I want to support hospice and at the same moment express my reservations, because hospice, in order to be fully acceptable into the economic structures of the society, meaning Medicare and so on, has avoided the spiritual aspects. And it has done so quite intentionally, actually. And I find that Cecily Saunders, who started the hospice movement, who I think is a very caring human being, still says death is an outrage. And I personally don't experience that. So that I want to support the hospice movement as a step in the right direction, but I want to say that we have a lot further to go in terms of what our possibilities are for creating environments for people as they're dying where they can have the spaciousness to explore the process they're going through without being surrounded by people who feel sorry for where they are. Because and what I have tried to do with Stephen Levine and his wife Andrea and Dale Borglum, a number of people, is over the years create a space. We've had different programs like Dial a Death, where you can call up and talk to people and have pillow talk with people to share with them the process of staying conscious through dying. We've had the Dying Center. We had one in New Mexico. My model was, and this was that I knew that my being with people that were dying, here's my predicament. I'm incarnated, and I have all of the stuff that goes with an incarnation. The deepest one is what's called first chakra, for those of you in those systems, understanding those systems, which is the fear of survival. It's preoccupation with survival. And I know that if I am going to work on myself spiritually in this lifetime, one of the things I want to do is work with my fear of death. And the way I can do that is by being around death during my lifetime. In the Theravadan Buddhist tradition, for example, they send the monks out to the cemeteries to spend the nights in the cemeteries. And in that tradition, they throw the bodies out there uncovered for the birds to eat it. So the whole thing is ecologically sound. So you go out there and you sit with the bloated corpse, the fly-infested corpse, the skeleton, and you get a chance to be aware of all the process of nature. And you watch your own disgust and loathing and fear, and as I am now, so you will be. Prepare yourself to follow me. And it's in a way beginning to see the whole way that the body is decaying and meditating on decay so that you can find the place in you that has nothing to do with that by opening to that rather than, because the denial of it keeps you stuck in it. That's the problem. Denial keeps you fixated. And so part of the work, and that's why I wanted to get as close to the dying process as I possibly could. So the combination of the two things, one was that something had happened inside of me, which was a spiritual awakening that made death feel different. And the second was that I wanted to work on myself and be close to the deepest fear of incarnation, which was the fear of death. That combination led me to start in about 1963 to work with dying people and to want to be available to them. Now, what could I do? I wasn't a doctor, I wasn't a nurse. I really had very little. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an ordained priest. So the question, what I could offer a human being, was that I've realized I've purified the way to say it now over the years. What I have offered another human being is a spacious environment with my mind in which they can die as they need to die. I realize that I have no moral right to define how another person should die, that each individual has their own karma, their own stuff to work out. It's not my job to say, you should die beautifully or you should die this way. I don't even know how they should die. So the dying center, in my mind, was an institution where people like me who wanted to be around people that were dying as part of their spiritual work on themselves would create the support system, whether they were nurses or doctors or attendants or whatever. And the place would be open to people who wished to use their death as a vehicle for their own awakening. Because as you're going through these processes, for a person that really sees life's journey as one of spiritual work on oneself, this is an optimum set of experiences to work with, the process of dying. So if you imagine now you have an institution in which everybody in the institution is there in order to spiritually awaken. They're called monasteries or ashrams. So instead of a place where it happens there are dyers and there are helpers of dyers there. But that's ground, not figure. The figure is the spiritual awakening. And everybody's there for the same reason. So you can hear, what I experience is that when I am with somebody, I work a lot with AIDS patients. Now here's a young person who very often is the object of social stigma. They're dealing with family rejection often. They're dealing with an opportunistic illness in which there are symptoms that are occurring in a jumbled mass, and you feel better and then you feel sick and then you hit here and then hit there. They're dealing with economic difficulties. When I come in to be with them, the first thing I have to do when I sit down with them is to open myself to all my reactions to their predicament. The minute I try to deny it, it catches me. So I have to open myself to it. So I have to open myself to my empathic reactions. That is, to me as a separate entity, feeling what it would feel like if I were being socially ostracized, had an opportunistic illness, was young, didn't have a chance to live out my dreams, all of it, all of the pain of it. So when I sit with somebody, the first thing I have to do is open my heart as a separate entity to this other separate entity and go through the process of empathy. That's not compassion yet, that's empathy. Of as a separate entity feeling what they're feeling. And to be able to do that is interesting. To be able to keep your heart open in hell, really, to keep your heart open when it's breaking in a situation. To do that requires that you have cultivated the spiritual perspective behind it that allows for the wisdom of the universe, that allows for I mean, this is a little much to say, but it's true. It allows for the perfection that exists even within the imperfection. And once you are rooted in that understanding, if you have stood back, if you've been able to stand back enough to see the beauties of the laws of the universe, to see the exquisite intricacy of the unfolding of the spark of God manifesting into form, Shekhinah, if you see that, just the brilliance of it, you are in awe. And at that point, the little mind that you have, which is just part of the manifestation, suddenly gets humble before that. And instead of saying, this is terrible, this suffering is awful, if I were doing it, I'd do it differently, you say, I really don't understand. But there's a place in me that has faith in the unfolding. And what has happened to me as a result of inner work, which I am talking about and commending to you, is that two planes of consciousness, living both with the perfection and with the pain of the suffering, allows you to stay with the pain without pushing it away, because you have the balance within yourself. It's as if you're part of the unity and you're also separate. You're part of the unfolding of it all that includes suffering. And once you've started to spiritually awaken, you re-perceive your own suffering and start to work with it as a vehicle for awakening. Now, the interesting part of that paradox is you don't say to another person that says, oh, I'm suffering, you don't say, hey, it's grace. See? Because you have to give people space to do what they need to do. And if they're at the stage of their evolution where they see their suffering as this horrible thing that's being done to them, you can do the best you can to remove their suffering, the way they're experiencing their suffering. As my guru says, God comes to the hungry in the form of food, and you get what you need. The more you are aware of the spiritual nature of life, the more you see the moment of death as a moment for release, for taking off the tight shoe. And the art form in dying is that at the moment of death, you are neither grabbing at life nor pushing it away. You're neither pushing nor pulling. It's the attraction and aversion that keeps you holding to form. So to prepare for the moment of death, when the processes that go on in consciousness are a dissolving of boundaries, a speeding up of awareness, a kind of an opening and expanding, to be in that process where you don't go, no, and grab hold, one prepares. One prepares for the moment of death. And it's interesting that in almost all the Eastern traditions, people see one of the works of life is the preparation for the moment of death. Now, each person does what they can do. We don't make believe we're more ready than we are. So that I'm very pleased that we're getting to the point now where people can decide how much pain medication they need in collaboration with their doctor, rather than the nurse saying, you had it 4 hours ago, you can't have any more. Each person knows, and when they know they have control over their pain medication, they need a lot less, it turns out, because a lot of it is their fear of pain that they're dealing with. See, after the first stage, when you empathize with the pain of another person, then comes the next stage where you start to meet the person behind it all. It's like, are you in there? I'm in here. Far out. What are you doing in there? I mean, if I can just run you through this kind of oversimplified model, if you had a little television receiver channel right here next to your eyes, what you're finding, what we're talking about is planes of consciousness or channels on a television set. And most of us, most of the time in this culture, act as if we have a 1 or 2 channel set. We don't have cable. And today we're talking about cable. We're talking about acknowledging all these other channels that are floating around in the room, but we're not picking them up because we don't know how to tune our receiver. That's basically what this is about. So on the first channel, when you look at another human being, you see old, young, dark, light, fat, thin, etc. You see physical body. And if you're obsessed with your physical body, that's what you see when you look in the world, other people's physical bodies. That's the channel you're on. If you flip one channel, then you're in the psychosocial realm. You see power and you see happiness and sadness and neurosis, and it's the therapy channel. It's the social role channel. It's where there are mothers and truck drivers and all lawyers and all the different roles and identities, all the social stuff. And that's all a channel, and that's as the world turns, and it's a never-ending source of fascination. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. Most people are happy with channel 2. In channel 1 and 2, about 98% of the people you've ever known are busy with those 2 channels all the time. But now we're talking about something else. We're talking about shifting. Now you shift one more channel, and there's a little in-between one, which is called, it's like the astral plane. It's where you're dealing with archetypes, the Jungian archetypes. You're dealing with what's called astral or mythic roles and mythic identities. It's that sort of place where you see people in their mythos rather than in their personality structures. And you look at me and you say, he's an Aries, I just knew it. You know, it's a Sagittarius and Leos, and you see there's 12 of us in various permutations. If you flip to the next channel, you go behind all those individual differences and you just see another soul just like you that has all that packaging that's different than you, but is just another being just like you. That's when you say, are you in there? I'm in here. How'd you get in that one? And you see all of the stuff of the personality and the astral and the mythic and the body and all of it as like packaging. And you see the spiritual individual entity. And just for fun, if you turn the channel once more, what it is it's looking at itself, looking at itself. There's only one of it. It's awareness aware of itself. And just to keep the Buddhists happy, you turn it once more and it all disappears, which is basically the one in itself. It's basically the one in itself, rather than looking at itself. Now, our predicament is that as long as you're on channel 1 and 2, you are afraid of death. Until you are rooted in these other levels of reality. That gives you a perspective about death that allows you to see death as a transformation of things which change. You can intellectually know from channel 1 and 2 that after all it's all nature and we are going to die, but that doesn't dissipate the fear. Fear comes from a gut intuitive knowing that comes from acknowledging these other parts of your being. And I say acknowledging. It's not learning them as if you're getting them from outside. It's acknowledging them from within yourself. And almost everybody has information about these all the time, but everybody's busy not having it. When you're too busy in channel 1 and 2, you treat information from these other channels as if it's error in the system. It's static. I can't bring in the channel clearly, you know. Somehow, I mean, it was interesting. When I was a psychologist, which I guess I still am, when I was a research psychologist, The best we could do in predicting human behavior, psychological behavior, were correlations around 50 or 55, 60 when we were lucky. That's accounting for about 30% of the variability. That means 70% of the differences, the variability, we couldn't account for. And we said, well, that's just the fact that our tools aren't good enough yet. Or we called it error variance. Error variance includes karma. It includes all of the other planes of reality that explain who we are at this moment. And I just like to keep the door open for some of these things. What happened was I've learned something about love, which is nice to learn about. And it's important to understand that in this dealing. First of all, most of our images of love in our society have to do with romantic love. They are poetic love. They are interpersonal love. I love you, you love me, we love each other. We all give lip service to, but hardly ever really acknowledge that there is another kind of love that is not interpersonal. We call it conscious love, or Christ's love, or God's love. And the image I have is that when you grow up in a society of conditional love, which most of us have grown up in because of the way in which we are socialized, we end up very needful for love. And that's why a lot of the literature is about love and affection. It's as if there's something in us that's very hungry. We're on a deprivation diet. And so when we meet somebody who has the key to unlock something in us, we experience that we are in love, and we say, I am in love with you. What we're really saying, another way of saying it in a kind of in instinct literature, is you are the key stimulus that is releasing the mechanism in me that allows me to be in love. You're my connection. And as my connection, I want to possess you, because I'm hungry to be in this state in my being. I have come into the place of love in my being. And everything is beautiful suddenly. But it only happens when you're around. So where will you be Thursday? And where will you be Friday? And where will you be for the rest of my life? Okay? And the tendency is to want to possess the beloved, which, as you and I both know, is one of the quickest ways to destroy the experience. And that love has in it fear, because somebody's going to die or go away or find another lover or something. Now, that's interpersonal romantic love. And that's why there's so much poetry about it, because it has the fear and the joy and all of the stuff in it. But now, take that image. The key stimulus is something that opens you to the place in yourself where you are love. And through the spiritual practices, and through understanding the metaphysics, and through opening yourself, you find yourself starting, whether you call it awareness, where you draw your awareness back from thought, or however you get in there through meditation, through devotion, through study, whatever your practices are, you find yourself starting to rest in the place of presence in your being, which has the quality of that openness, that boundarylessness, that intuitive heart space where you experience that you are in love. But now you are no longer dependent on an external thing to awaken you to it. You're beginning to rest in it. So you are beginning to be love. And once you have that spiritual perspective that allows you to keep your heart open in the hell and the pain and the grief and the stuff, then you can start to be in love with another human being without feeling the possessive quality about it. And because I work a lot with people that are grieving for the loss of a loved one. And my way of supporting grieving is to say, grieve. My God, grieve. Don't try to stop grieving. Don't be strong. Grieve some more. Go grieve some more. Just allow the human pain. Don't hide it. Just keep going through it. And then at some point, you will quiet down naturally. It might take a couple of years, who knows? At some point you will quiet down, and you will be quiet enough to realize that the love, when you and another person enter into the space of love together for even a moment, that relationship has transcended relationship. You have entered into a unitive moment together, and that transcends death. And at that moment, when you quiet down enough and you're sitting with your beloved, you suddenly realize that where did they go? As Ramana Maharshi said, where could I go? I'm still here. It's just the form that left. You were busy missing the form. You weren't missing the essence, because the essence is here. And when you recognize that, you feel as a human being enriched by everybody you have loved, instead of deprived by the loss of their form. You realize that they're living through you, and that everybody you've ever loved is part of the fabric of your being now, in the way in which you go forward. And that's where grief gets transformed into a living love space of a spiritual transcendence of the pain. In Tibet, when they're giving you the instructions, they say, at the end, they say, as the earth element leaves, your body will feel heavy. As the water element leaves, you will feel dryness. As the fire element leaves, you may feel cold. As the air element leaves, your out-breath will be longer than your in-breath. The signs are now here. Don't get lost in the detail. Let your awareness go free. Imagine, oh, I'm thirsty. She's thirsty. Give her water. I'm cold. Instead of, the earth element. The water element. Just recognize what an adventure this transformation is. The appreciation of death and the spiritual journey after death is the prerequisite for living life joyfully now. Death does not have to be treated as an enemy for you to delight in life. Keeping death present in your consciousness as one of the greatest mysteries and as the moment of incredible transformation imbues this moment with added richness and energy that otherwise is used up in denial. I encourage you to make peace with death, to see it as the culminating adventure of this adventure called life. It is not an error. It is not a failure. It is taking off a tight shoe, which you have worn well, but those that find the way in the morning can gladly die in the evening, it is said in the mystical literature. So I encourage you to explore and find in your being that part of you that is on those other channels So that when on channels 1 and 2, the World Turns series comes to its final chapters, you won't be caught in feeling loss, but rather the adventure. Because from where I'm sitting, life on this plane of reality, because I live in the world of reincarnation, of karma, of life on this plane is like being in the 4th grade. You took birth here because you had certain work to do that involves the suffering you do, the kinds of situations you found yourself in. This is your curriculum. It's not an error. Where you are now with all your neuroses and your problem, you're sitting in just the right place. Imagine that. Imagine that. Nobody made an error. And all that stuff in you of saying, if only I could be. No, this is it, including the if only. It's perfect. And then at the time you graduate and somebody says, oh, but he died so young. So if you graduate from 4th grade early, big deal, wonderful. Don't get so caught in worshiping life that you lose the balance, that realizing that the Spirit says, live life fully and richly as a partner with God, and at the same moment, don't be afraid of the next thing. Go towards it with openness and with love, and not with forbidding. The way that is understood in the morning, one can gladly die in the evening. Just developing that part of you that is very quiet, that is just witnessing the phenomena that arise at each sense door and the phenomena of thoughts that come and go. Just let your awareness wander. If you hear the river, note the hearing of the river. Then you might feel some sensation in your foot. Notice that. And then a thought may come up about future or the past, or notice that. Keep cultivating that which notices the sensations and the thoughts. You're cultivating the witness that witnesses phenomena as they arise, exist, and pass away. Now let your awareness let arise into your awareness thoughts that concern some way in which you personally have experienced suffering. Just let the thought arise in your mind. Keep your witness strong. How do I suffer? What suffering has there been in my life? let yourself into it just a little, it will awaken a lot of thoughts that arouse, that are feeling like emotions. Perhaps your suffering is around illness. Perhaps it's around loneliness and separateness. Perhaps it's around addictions, obsessions. Perhaps it's around shame or loathing, your acts or your fantasies, or qualities of your body or your personality. Perhaps your suffering has been around the suffering of loved ones or the death of loved ones. Perhaps the suffering is rooted in doubt and confusion. Perhaps the suffering is connected with anger, grudges, vindictiveness, unforgivingness, the tightness that creates. Perhaps your suffering arises out of your seeing of the unfairness in the world, to yourself and to others, the unfairness in prisons, the unfairness of political systems, unfairness that the American Indians suffer, or the have-nots in the world. Perhaps your suffering is because of the threat of destruction that is inherent within the bomb, the nuclear bomb, or the destruction that is going on to the earth, to the forests, to the oceans. Perhaps your sadness is because of the illnesses that others are suffering, such as AIDS, cancer. Perhaps your sadness is because of things unfulfilled in your life. Dreams that never came to fruition. We all have them. We all have a lot of these. Notice the relation between the witness of that sadness and that suffering inside yourself and the sadness and suffering itself. Notice that as you get closer into the suffering, how bad you feel. And at the same moment, retain the witness that sees the suffering as part of the human condition. Stay right at the line between where your sufferings take you over on one end and where you become the impersonal witness on the other. Stay right at the cusp between those 2 points. Can you see the way in which this suffering is contributing to your growth and your awakening? Just stay with it a little bit. Get a little deeper into the suffering. Just feel the longings and the frustrations, the pains, the tightness of the body, the closedness. The self-consciousness. You're working towards the point where you can be fully in the suffering and fully in the witness at the same moment. Pushing away nothing, clinging to nothing. Is there a way you can see the deepest sufferings in your life as vehicles for growth? Look back over some of the sufferings of your life. Can you see the relationship between them and you now? If your sufferings are sufferings because of what has been done to you by others, wittingly or unwittingly, by the universe, by God, are you clinging to the resentment and the anger? Is it making you tight and separate? Or is there a quality of forgiveness? Of understanding about how it all is? Can you bring to mind anybody who has cut you off, who has done injustice? Can you feel how painful it is to keep them out of your heart? Can you touch them with an appreciation of the fact that we are fellow beings, often lost and often creating suffering? Can you touch another person with the warmth of forgiveness? I forgive you. I forgive you. Can't you see that holding on to resentment and anger and unforgivingness, how it starves you? Can you bring that person into your mind's eye and see that being as a soul who is caught and whose actions create suffering in others? When you say, I forgive you, it's just acknowledging the other being's soul instead of identifying them with their actions. Your actions are good or bad, but you are just like me, another being, seeking light. Maybe your suffering is because you have acted in a way that has hurt others, and others feel resentment towards you. And you have increased someone else's separateness, isolation, paranoia. And it hurts deeply. Imagine that person before you and witness the part of you that acted in that way and how you got caught in the unfolding of your karma. I ask your forgiveness if I have made your journey more difficult. However I have hurt or injured you, whatever confusion or fear of mind I may have caused you, I ask your forgiveness. And then allow yourself to feel forgiven. Allow yourself to let go. Receive it. Draw it into your heart. However I have caused you pain in the heart in the past, through my anger, through my lust, through my fear, through my ignorance, my blindness, my confusion, however I have caused you pain, I ask that you let me back into your heart. I ask your forgiveness. And allow yourself to be forgiven. Now gently turn and face yourself. How often we put ourselves out of our own hearts. Calling to yourself by your first name inside your own mind. I forgive you. I invite you back into my heart. Feel all the ways you have closed yourself off from yourself. The way in which you have been angry or judging. Felt yourself to be insufficient, ugly, evil, inadequate. The ways in which you have isolated and pushed yourself away, denigrated yourself. Can you let yourself back into the wholeness of the universe? Can you allow yourself to be just the way you are and appreciate how delicate, how difficult, how subtle, how profound is the journey of the experiences of life? I forgive you. I let you back into my heart. I forgive you your fear. I forgive you your addictions. I forgive you your weaknesses. I forgive you your anger. I forgive you your separateness. I forgive you your pettiness and your petulance. I forgive you your judgments. Can you acknowledge your humanity just as it is? We all have it. We all have it. I am. I am just as I am. I exist. This is the stuff to work with. It's the holdings that cause the suffering. It's the judging that makes it, I'm not enough the way I am. only I were different, it would be all right. You allow a tree to be a tree, a rock to be a rock. But you can't allow yourself to be yourself. Just as you are. I forgive you. I bring you back into my heart. I allow myself to exist. I allow myself to be one of the faces of the beloved. I am beloved. I am the beloved. Can you see the beauty in all of it? Just as it is. Can you see the way in which your clinging to judgments about yourself cuts you off from others? How you're afraid that the truth of your being will not be acceptable to other human beings. And so we suffer alone, rather than risk the truth. The truth that would show us that all of us have these seeds of suffering. All of us. If you cannot accept yourself and your own beauty, how will you see in others? Such mercy we must have towards ourselves. Such a difficult journey it is. How much we have been closed off and frightened. We've tried so hard to come out of it. And we felt so trapped, many of us. We've got to be gentle with ourselves, so gentle. It is in the patterns of dark and light, in the shadows and the brightness. It's in the blending and the balancing that the beauty lies. The horrible beauty of nature. And our minds and our senses and our histories are all part of nature. Can you not allow nature to manifest? Can you not appreciate yourself as an evolving, awakening awareness? Just beginning to sense the sunlight, to taste of the possibility. Gently rest in the breath, so soft. Breath, a cave, softness of the in-breath and the out-breath. A place of equanimity. May I, through the work on myself, become an instrument for the relief of suffering in all beings. May I, through the work on myself, become an instrument for the relief of suffering of all beings. Breathing in, breathing out. What grace that we can even touch the possibility of seeing through the veil. What incredible grace.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.